Hey, it is Zennial Gamer back with another auto win team video for you guys. Today we're going to be talking about Woosa, Gany, and Rica. And yes, I know the first question is, I don't have Woosa, I don't have Rica, I don't have Gany, can they be replaced? The answer is yes for all three, although I will say the replacements for Gany are not quite as smooth or as good as the replacements for Woosa and Rica, but Woosa and Rica are very replaceable in this team. So, before we talk about the replacements, let's first talk about the core team itself. Now, one of the biggest things with this team is you need to make sure that you have will runes on your monsters and you go into a team that does not have strip, which is exactly what you see right here. All three monsters have will runes, the opponent team does not have strip, the opponent team has a ton of sustain, and I have no damage on the surface, right? But I've got a lot of control. So here what we're going to do is we're actually going to go ahead and reset the Molly so that she can't do any cleanse. Vigor's already done his thing. We'll go ahead and put glancing on the monkey, and then we'll put up our shield. Now, I will tell you guys also the speed tuning for me on this team is not great. So when we get to the point where I show the stats, I will give you some recommended speed tuning as well. Ideally what you would want here is for the Rica to go before the Gany. But I use these monsters in other parts of the game as well, and honestly the speed tuning has never been that big of a deal for me. So in this case you can see we were able to get the ventilation on the Rica. Now we've got a bunch of dots out, and this is basically just a waiting game. Unfortunately the Molly did get her shield up, but at the end of the day we are still going to be fine. That's the thing with this team is we have so much control because you get the turn denial from the Gany, you get the despair stuns from the Rica, you get the ventilates from the Gany. By the way, you can also ventilate, like if I needed the immunity right there, I could just ventilate the Woosa and be more patient. So this does go both ways. Of course, the Molly is just going to infinitely proc because that's what she does, but we're not too worried about it. We'll go ahead, we want to just keep the damage spread out in this case because Molly only can heal one unit. So we just keep spreading the damage out until eventually one of these units goes down. Here we're just going to reset the Molly again. And of course, I've got 2 units on bio. That's going to make a big difference for this team. You do want to make sure that your Gany and your Woosa are both on bio. The Rica, of course, is going to be on despair. And now the dots are starting to pile up. Molly's not going to be able to out-heal all of this. I could have also put a little bit of damage into the Vigor right there, but it just wasn't necessary. So you can see at this point, we were never in danger at any point throughout this fight. Even though Molly got some early procs, there was really just nothing for us to worry about. Vigor goes down here, and we'll just keep dotting and going through in a big circle until the opponent is dead. Now, you guys might see this and be like, oh, he's just using some OP runes to make that work. That's not really the case here. So for my account, all 3 of these units are actually in really, really bad runes. So we're going to take a look at the runes now, and then we'll talk about some of the alternatives. But first we'll look at the Woosa. So the Woosa's at 232. He's on an HP, he's actually on speed. There you go. He's on speed, HP, kind of a standard build, but really slow. Not a lot of speed through subs, considering I'm using a speed slot too, and considering he has a 232 base. So the ideal Woosa, if you're using Woosa a lot in Siege, the ideal Woosa would have like these stats plus max resistance if you have late endgame runes and all that. But again, that's the point. This Woosa is not on my best runes. The Rica here. So the Rica is going to be in Despair Will. A little over 30k HP. Again, ideally Rica would have a little bit more HP than that, a little higher rune quality. 230 speed, and then resistance with a decent amount of accuracy, and then some S3 accuracy on the artifacts. And then the Gany over here, 239 with a crit rate accuracy build, 0 HP, 0 defense. This Gany is really not sufficient. I'm just going to tell you guys that right now. For this team, you really don't need the crit rate. I have Gany on crit rate actually for TOA Hell. You also probably don't need quite this much accuracy, although the accuracy does help. But he has an irresistible reset, so the accuracy is just for the S3 attack bar. But yeah, I would definitely take this crit rate rune if I was gonna run this team every single siege. I would take this crit rate rune and change it into an HP rune, and then the rest of the build is okay. He's got good defense and all that. Now, in terms of speed tuning, you want your Woosa to go last, to make the immunity last as long as possible. So you actually want your turn order to be Rica, followed by Gany, followed by Woosa. All 3 of them must be on will runes, and you should never take this team into an opponent team that has strip. Now, I know the Molly has strip in the team I just went into, but that's You know, it's a 50% activation on turn 1. The only monster I really have to protect right there is the Rica, because that's who the Vigor is going to follow up on, because Molly doesn't defense break, so even if the Molly strips the Woosa, we're fine. I guess technically the like worst case scenario, Molly could strip Woosa, and then the Monkey goes S2, and then the Vigor follows up on the Woosa, but even then the Woosa's tanky enough, he's not going to die. But with that said, if the Molly were to strip the Rica and then the Vigor goes into the Rica and lands a defense break, it could get a little bit sticky, but again, the Rica's not going to die in this build, not to that specific team. So you want to avoid any opponent that has AoE strip into CC or AoE snipe potential. Like you want to be careful against Mo Longs, for example, because we're not building this team to outspeed. There's no speed lead here. And all of these monsters, again, for my account, they're runed pretty slow, and if you follow kind of the same type of runing pattern, then it'll be built fairly slow on your team. So if you bring it into like a Molong Woosa, you could lose the Rica before the Rica ever takes a turn. But anything like those old Xing Zhe teams, a lot of Tessarian teams, anything that does not have a lot of strip and does not have snipe potential, this team will allow you to just go in, let the opponent hit you while you've got will runes, and then you put up the Woosa shield, you get sustain from Woosa, you get the CC from Gany, and you get the dots from Rica. Now, what if you don't have a Woosa? Well, Luis has an awfully similar kit to Woosa. So if you look at Luis right here, skill 3 is going to be recovery, it's going to be immunity with some conditions, it's going to be a really, really thick shield. Skill 2 is invincibility, which also has a cleanse. That's actually an upgrade over Woosa in some ways. So we lose the Woosa's ability to do damage, and we lose the Woosa sustain on the S2. Instead, the sustain comes on the S3. Technically, the immunity is going to be a little bit better from Woosa as well, but Luis gives us an HP lead and a better S2. And again, you can see my Luis here. This is not like the best runes on my account. We didn't make the max resistance or anything else, but this team should work just fine right here. Now, if you don't have the Rica, you can use Belinus in place of the Rica. I will tell you the Belinus is not quite as good as the Rica. And the Belinus is way harder to rune, so that's going to be the biggest thing. If you want a Belinus that does really big damage, he needs to be on a crit rate build, or crit rate or crit damage, but he needs really high accuracy in order to make sure he lands the debuffs. Probably needs to be on violent. Generally speaking, you can use the Belinus in place of the Rica, but you're going to need higher rune quality. Whereas with the Luis, it's basically the same or even slightly lower rune quality as you would use with the Woosa. Now, if you have neither Luis or Woosa, you can also use Lulu here. The Lulu is going to be a little bit more YOLO because you don't get the shield, so you have to be careful that your units are tanky enough that you're not going to wind up getting killed without the shields. Again, so that basically means avoiding things like a Mo Long, things like that. But you guys can see how this match is going already. This was extremely easy. We are actually only in G2 Siege right now, but this is still, G2 Guild War right now, but this is still a G2 Guild War defense right here. Against runes that, again, are not necessarily in my best overall rune sets, or against monsters, using monsters that are, again, not necessarily in my best overall rune sets. And we're perfectly fine as we go through and just dot everything out. So the Woosa is a perfect replacement for the Luis. The Luis is a perfect replacement for the Woosa. If you have both, you can actually use that for a little bit of elemental manipulation as well, depending on where you want to drive the enemy's attacks. Having the double wind plus the fire could potentially make the Rica safer or less safe, depending on what actual defense that you're facing. So again, the last variation that we talked about here would be using the Belinus. Now, is the Gany replaceable? Yes and no. So if you don't have Gany, the biggest thing with Gany is the ability to ventilate. So what we're really benefiting from on the Gany is that he can allow your, whether it's Rica or whether it's Belinus, he can allow them to take more turns. But the Gany also taking away the opponent's attack bar is a big deal. Now, if we use, let's say, a Jemire in place of the Gany, we do get that basically ventilate. You know, the Jemire skill 3 will basically allow us to get the exact same benefit of allowing the Rica to go twice, but it does have a longer cooldown. What's a slightly bigger issue than that, though, is the Jemire does not take away the opponent's attack bar, and sometimes it does make a big difference when you're not able to take away the opponent's attack bar. So in this case, you can see this is also a really nice counter to things like Triana or Huadam, because you can just dot the opponents right out. Obviously with Rica, there would have been even more dots than that. The Luis works just great in this team. You can certainly use the Lulu in place of the Luis as well. The Jameir in place of the Gany, I'd be a little bit more careful. I think it's possible to use. Now, if you do have Elenoa, by the way, Elenoa is an LD5, but if you have Elenoa and you don't have Gany, that would be another viable one. I think the Elenoa would work really well in this team. Basically, you want something that's going to allow you to turn cycle so that you can drop enough continuous damage, or in the case of Belinus, so that you can get enough turns where you've still got the provokes and the defense breaks and all of that. So if you can get that turn cycling from any unit that replaces the Gany, you'd be fine. Anyway, guys, on that note, you can see the Belinus stats behind me. The Belinus is definitely not built for this. This is a TOA Hell build, definitely not built for this particular team. It's too likely that if some units attacked him, he could actually die, even through the immunity and everything else. But this is not the build you would want. You would want your Belinus again to be tankier, but the thing is, I said the Belinus is stat hungry, right? So the Belinus needs the accuracy and he needs the crit rate. He can get away with a lot less speed here because he also turn cycles. He gains attack bar every time he attacks, right? So he can get away with less speed, but he needs the crit rate, he needs the accuracy, he needs the attack because his actual skills scale to attack, and then he on top of that needs at least 5, if not 10,000 more HP from this. So he's going to be very stat hungry. The Rica is obviously the better fit for this team. I will tell you guys another one I didn't mention, also Thrain. You could definitely use Thrain in place of the Rica. He gives you additional CC from the guaranteed stun. Well, they're not guaranteed, but from the stuns that have a better rate than Despair, right? So you would actually run a Violent Thrain in this case. You could run a Despair Thrain too, either way. Or you could run a Swift Thrain if you can't make the stats with that low 91 base speed. But you could run Thrain in place of the Rica or the Belinus. I think he would do fantastic in this team as well. Anyway, guys, that's it for today's video. As always, I appreciate you watching. I hope you remember to smash the like button, drop a comment, and go ahead and subscribe. Guys, once again, thanks for your support on the channel, and we'll catch you on the next video.